What's up everybody, I'm True, and in this video I'm going to show you how to calculate your true DPS as a Whirlwind Barb. Because as you may know, the DPS the game shows is nowhere near the amount of DPS that you're truly doing. Now this will be very helpful for those of you who want to know about possible gear changes or where you need to improve in order to get to Monster Power 10 and be able to handle the Uber bosses. Alright, so real quick, I'm just going to show you guys my stats, and you guys can either pause the video and write my stats down, or you can come back and check them later when I'm doing my math, so you guys know what to put your stats in. Alright, so in this first section, I'm going to show you how to calculate the DPS that your tornadoes are doing. Now the first thing you need to do is you need to find out what your DPS of your main hand weapon is, right? So just put your mouse over the weapon, and it'll show you what the DPS is. Alright, so every time that a tornado hits, it's doing 60% of whatever the main hand damage is, right? So you take whatever your DPS of your main hand weapon is, in my case 1145, and you multiply it by 0.6, and that's what you're going to get your tornado damage is, right? So right here I have 687. Now you take that damage and you multiply it by what your strength is divided by 100, alright? So I have 2,453 strength. Divide that by 100, you get 24.53. So you multiply 687 by 24.53, and you get 16,852 for my stats. So that's what each tornado does every time it ticks and it hits somebody. Next, you have to take into account what your average attack speed is. Now, your average attack speed is the attack speed of your main hand plus the attack speed of your offhand divided by 2. Now, this is after all of the attack bonuses, so it's not the attack speed that you see on the weapon, it's the attack speed that you see on your stats. So just attack twice, and it'll rotate between the attack speeds, add up the two attack speeds that you see, and then divide by 2. That's your average attack speed. So as you can see here, my average attack speed is basically 2 attacks per second, which is what you want to have roughly as a Whirlwind Barb. So then what I did was I took the crit damage that I had, and I figured that out, right? So I took the damage that your tornado does with your strength, so the 16,852, and then you multiply it by what your critical hit damage is, right? Divided by 100 again. So I have 462. So what I do is you divide that by 100, you get 4.62, and you multiply that by 16,852, what your tornado damage is with your strength. So when my tornadoes crit, they're doing 77,856 damage. Next, I took the damage from a normal tornado, multiplied it by 2, and then I took a damage from the tornado with the crit times 2. And I did it times 2 because that's my average attack speed, okay? So if I get 2 attacks and they're each normal, they're doing 33,704 damage. If I get 2 attacks and they're both crits, I'm doing 155,712 damage. So this next part, in order to make it simple, I assume that your critical chance is 50%, okay? Now, I chose 50% because that is about what you want to have as a Whirlwind Barb, and it's a lot easier to figure out your numbers, and then you can go from there and change things up as you go. So, if my crit chance was 50%, what you do is you add 1 tornado damage with the strength, a normal one, and then 1 from the tornado crit. Now, you do this because you're getting 2 attacks per second, and at 50% chance to crit, you're getting 1 normal attack and 1 crit attack per second. So you add up what both of those are. So that means per second on 1 tornado, I'm doing 94,708 damage. So then just to show you how powerful these tornadoes really are, the next 3 sections I took over 5 seconds what 1 tornado would do to 1 enemy, all right? So over 5 seconds, if you have a crit chance of 50% and the rest of my stats, it's doing 473,540 damage. If my crit chance was 45%, I'm doing 443,000. And if my crit chance was 55%, which it is in the game, I'm doing 504,000 damage per tornado per second to 1 enemy. Now you also have to remember that you can have 4 tornadoes out at one time, and that these tornadoes can hit multiple enemies. 1 tornado can hit multiple enemies if they're small and they're all stacked up in the same space. So that's how you end up doing millions and millions of damage to these, bosses and these elites that have hundreds of millions of health. So for this next section, you're going to find out how much damage you do with your Whirlwind skill. Now your tornadoes only do damage based off of your main hand weapon. Whirlwind does damage based off your main hand and your offhand damage because they rotate when you're whirlwinding, okay? So first thing you have to do is you take your main hand damage and your offhand damage and you multiply it by 1.45 because the Whirlwind skill does 145% weapon damage. So for me, my main hand with the Whirlwind is doing 1,660 damage. My offhand is doing 906 damage. Now do the same thing that you did up top with the tornadoes and you multiply by your strength. So after you multiply by strength, so that's how much damage you're doing. Your main hand, my main hand is doing 40,720 damage. My offhand is doing 22,224 damage. Once again, now we find out how much damage we do with the crit. So you multiply by your crit, and I'm doing with my main hand 188,126, and with my offhand 102,675 when my Whirlwind crits. So now keeping it simple and doing the same thing that we did up top, you assume your crit is 50%. So your DPS, you add up one normal attack and one crit. So for my main hand, I'm doing 228,846. With my offhand, I'm doing 124,000 and basically 900 damage with 50% crit chance per second. Now this part is a little tricky because you're not hitting with your main hand and your offhand at the same time. You're rotating through. So you can't necessarily do 2 attacks of each per second, because you're technically only getting 1 attack from each of them per second. So what I did was I took your crit chance at 50% and I did it over 20 seconds as opposed to the 5 seconds that I did with tornadoes, because 20 seconds allows you to get, with 2 attacks per second, which is what I have, 10 main hand normal attacks, 10 main hand crit attacks, plus you're getting 10 offhand normal attacks and 10 offhand critical attacks. Okay? So if you follow with that, at 2 attacks per second, over 20 seconds, you're getting 40 attacks. All right? So with 50% crit chance, you're getting 20 main hand attacks and 20 offhand attacks. And since 50% of those attacks are crits, then you divide that in half, you get 10 normal, 10 crit for each of your weapons. So at 20 seconds, a crit chance 50%, my Whirlwind skill is doing 3,537,450 damage. Then you can see down here in the next 2 sections, with 45% crit chance, you're having 11 main hand normal, 9 main hand crits, same with your offhand. And then with your crit at 55%, you're getting 9 normal and 11 crit for each of your weapons. So then you plug that in, figure that out, and then with 55%, which is what I have, I'm doing 3,765,307 damage over 20 seconds with my Whirlwind skill. Now here comes the grand finale. Okay, this is where we put everything together and we find out exactly how much damage you are doing per second in the game. All right, so you can have 4 tornadoes out at one time. So now once again, I'm going to assume 50% crit chance. All right, so with that 50% crit chance, 4 tornadoes, what you're doing is you're taking the DPS from your tornadoes up top, the 5-second crit chance at 50%, divide it by 5. That's what you're doing per second, okay? Then multiply that by 4, assuming you have 4 tornadoes out. And with my stats, I get 378,832, okay? That's how much damage I'm doing per second with 4 tornadoes. So let's say I'm fighting a boss, okay? So I'm fighting Gom. You have 4 tornadoes, all right, that are all hitting him at the same time. You're doing 378,832 damage per second. Then you add in what your Whirlwind damage is per second. So that is you take whatever crit chance you have. In this case, I'm still assuming 50%. Okay, so that's the 3,537,450 number. And you divide that by 20. Okay? Divide that by 20 because that's what you're doing per second. So then you add that to your 4 tornado damage. So then with my stats, if my crit chance was 50%, I would be doing 555,705 damage per second. Then down here at the bottom, just to kind of show you what the difference would be, I took it at 45% and I figured all that out. You got 519,000, basically 520,000. And then with my stats of 55% crit chance, I figured out that I'm doing 591,000 and basically 500 damage per second. Okay, so that's with everything together, with 4 tornadoes, and this would be against, like, let's say a boss. Okay, that's what I'm doing. Basically doing 600,000 damage per second to a boss. Now, this doesn't take into account having tornadoes spread apart and hitting multiple enemies, because then when you're hitting multiple enemies, obviously your DPS skyrockets because you're doing, this amount of damage to multiple people, so you would technically add it up. But that's too hard to figure out because you have to assume the number of enemies that are, there, how many that you're actually hitting with your tornadoes. So this just shows what you're doing to one focused enemy per second. And then the more enemies around, obviously, the more damage you're going to do, and the more quickly you're going to be able to kill people. So hopefully I got this out clear enough and in a way that you guys can understand my logic and how it went through, and then you guys can just take your numbers, plug it into my formulas, and then you guys can figure out what all your DPS is. Now, if any part of this video was helpful, please hit the like button below, and to stay up to date with my latest videos about Diablo 3 and other Whirlwind Barb news, please make sure to subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button directly above this video. I'm really looking to get to 100 subscribers, and if I do, I'll make you guys a deal. See, I get pretty jumpy during scary movies, so if you guys can make that happen, okay, get me to 100 subscribers, I'll post a video of my reactions while watching the new movie that just came out called Sinister, right? Looks pretty scary. I've heard some pretty scary reviews from it. So I'll watch this in the dark by myself late at night, and I will show you guys the reactions of me, the highlights basically, of me watching this movie. So if this catches on, I'll even start letting you guys choose the movies that you want to see my reactions for. So keep that in mind, spread the word, help me get to 100 subscribers, and then I will do this for you guys, and then I'll let you guys even start picking my movies for me. So hey guys,